On December 6, 1969, a sprawling crowd gathered at a dusty speedway in California for what had supposed to be a West Coast Woodstock, a free concert headlined by the Rolling Stones. But by nightfall, the Altamont Speedway Free Festival had descended into chaos and bloodshed, shattering the utopian haze of the 1960s. What unfolded has been variously described as, quote, the day the US counterculture's utopian hippie dream died, a violent full stop at the end of the summer of love. In the span of a single day, a festival meant to celebrate peace and music became a symbol of dark potent, rock and roll's darkest day. The story of Altamont is a cautionary tale of idealism undone by naivete, bad planning, and the stark realities of a changing era. Before the carnage and the infamy, however, there was hope, a hope that makes what happened all the more tragic. When Mick Jagger stepped onto the low stage at Altamont, surveying a sea of nearly 300,000 faces as the sun was sinking, an uneasy energy crackled in the air. Burly members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club flanked the stage, beer in hand and pool cues at the ready. Jagger tried to project his usual cocky charisma, but something was off. By the time the Stones launched into Under My Thumb, violence had already erupted in the crowd. As the band played on, an 18-year-old fan in a lime green suit brandished a revolver near the stage before stabbed to death by an angel. The Gimme Shelter film would later freeze frame on this moment, as if the horror of Altamont demanded to be relived in slow motion. In the chaos, the Rolling Stones played on, unaware or in denial that a young man was dying at their feet. The 1960s, with all its flower child optimism, were dying too, a bitter end captured on camera. How did it come to this? To understand Altamont is to trace the journey of the Stones and the hippie era itself. From the hopeful highs of mid-1969, when a generation believed music could bring about a new age of peace, to the disillusionment that followed. This is the story of the Stones at Altamont, told in full, the road leading in, the days of dread, and the lasting echo of rock and roll's all-time worst day, when everything went perfectly wrong. Hello dolls, and welcome back to another video. Welcome to the Rolling Stones at Altamont. This is a video I have been wanting to do for the longest time. It is one of the biggest events when we talk about the end of the 60s, the hippie culture. That was one of those moments where it kind of felt like a part of the hippie culture died. And I've always been interested in the dynamics behind that concert because it felt like from the beginning this was kind of like set out to fail, and in a sense it really was. So I was interested in seeing how all of this came to be and how this tragedy really happened. So most of today's video comes from this book, and you can already see there are some marks. I'm going to read from it. This is Altamont, the Rolling Stones, the Hells Angels, and the Inside Story of Rock's Darkest Day by Joel Selvin. I loved this book as much as you can love a book about something so tragic, but it is very well written. It goes into so many details. I loved it, and I'm gonna say like 80 to 90% of this video comes pretty much straight from this book. I'm gonna link it for you down below in case you want to get a copy. It was a great read, and this book goes into so much detail than what I am able to go into with this video. So if you want to learn more, I cannot recommend you enough to read this book. I'm currently reading a couple of Rolling Stones books actually because there is another Rolling Stones video coming in like a couple of weeks, and it's interesting because Altamont was a very life-changing event for the Rolling Stones, and I think for a lot of people who were there that day. Grace Slick has spoken about it, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, they have spoken about it. It just was such a tragic and painful day for a lot of people. In the song American Pie, Don McLean is singing about the day the music died, and a lot of people believe that he is referencing Altamont there. If you don't know anything about Altamont, you're in for a ride, because this is the story of how 4 people lost their lives at a free concert. Before we get into this video, the sun is coming in. I don't want to close the blinds because it is so beautiful and sunny in January, and I'm excited about it. This is also a new space for me to film, so I don't really know how all of this is going to work out. I hope the lighting is okay. I hope you like the sun. I put the curtain in front a little bit so that it is not too harsh, but the light will probably change throughout this video. But yeah, I hope you don't mind. I love filming with natural light. But now, without any more talking, let me take you back to December of 1969. Welcome to Altamont. Chapter 1, Summer's End, from Hyde Park to Altamont. Although Altamont happened in December, it all started in the summer of 1969. London's Hyde Park was awash in sunlight and sorrow. Just 2 days prior, on July 3rd, Brian Jones, the Rolling Stones founder and former lead guitarist, had been found dead in his swimming pool under murky circumstances. In a hastily organized free concert on July 5th, the Stones took the stage before 250,000 people to honor Brian's memory. Mick Jagger read from Percy Shelley's poetry. That is actually Mary Shelley's son. Mary Shelley is the woman who wrote Frankenstein. She's a really interesting person, just dropping that in here. But Mick read a poem in Brian's memory. Peace, peace, he is not dead. He doth not sleep. He hath awakened from the dream of life. Thousands of white butterflies were released into the sky. It should have been a mournful occasion, yet an atmosphere of gentle reverie prevailed. Despite the band's ragged performance, they were out of practice and the new guitarist, Mick Taylor, had barely rehearsed for this gig. The concert felt like a communal catharsis. Fans helped clean up the park afterwards. Remarkably, London's Hyde Park was left immaculate by the crowd. There were no arrests that day. The British chapter of the Hells Angels, really they were just UK biker friends, and they were not really connected to the US Hells Angels. This is something that will come up over and over again in the story, how the UK bikers and the UK Hells Angels were a lot milder than the ones in the US. The British Hells Angels had casually provided security and mingled with the crowd without any incidents. It was a peaceful gathering, a testament to the ideals of the hippie era: community, harmony, and free music in the park. Yet, even as the Stones basked into the afterglow of Hyde Park, storm clouds were gathering in their world. The band was nearly broke in 1969, despite their fame. Years of bad record deals and a split from their manager had left them in financial disarray. To refill their coffers, the Rolling Stones embarked on an ambitious US tour in the fall of 1969, their first American tour in 3 years. Rock concerts had evolved dramatically in that time, no longer mere 20-minute sets for screaming teens. They had become marathon happenings with light shows, long jams, and psychedelic vibes. The epic Woodstock Festival in August of 1969 seemed proof that free music could summon 500,000 people in joyous peace. The Rolling Stones, however, had missed Woodstock. Now they wanted not only to make money, but to claim their place in the new rock pantheon. Their 1969 US tour was a smash, sellout arenas and adoring crowds, but it drew some criticism. Famed music columnist Ralph J. Gleason accused the Stones of greed, citing their then unusually high ticket prices, around $7, and that was considered quite steep at the time, which honestly would be a dream right now. And he also criticized their stinginess towards their black opening acts. The band's public image as counterculture heroes was at stake, and Mick Jagger bristled at the criticism. In a bit of savvy PR and genuine competitive spirit, he floated a dramatic idea. The Stones would end the tour with a massive free concert as a gesture of thanks and a grand finale. Quote, "Of course they were doing it for the money, but they couldn't be seen as doing it for the money," music critic Grail Marcus later wrote. A free concert would simultaneously appease critics, one-up Woodstock, and burnish the Stones' hippie-era cred. Crucially, this idea didn't arise in a vacuum. The Grateful Dead, the de facto house band of the San Francisco hippie scene, had experienced staging free shows in Golden Gate Park. In October of 1969, the Dead's manager Rock Scully visited the Stones in London, armed with California green buds and LSD. Around a haze-filled living room, Scully spun tales of the West Coast music scene. Quote, "rock and roll in the parks and magical marijuana growing in the woods," as he described it. The notion of a Woodstock West took root. The Stones, Scully, and members of Jefferson Airplane imagined a free concert in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park, with the Rolling Stones as special guests of the local bands. For the Stones, it was an irresistible proposition, part altruism, part self-promotion. As Jagger and Keith Richards announced their tour, they hinted at a huge free concert in San Francisco to culminate their run. Behind the scenes, however, turning this utopian vision into reality would prove to be far more difficult than anyone could have imagined. Chapter 2, Let It Bleed, Planning a West Coast Woodstock. The plan for a free festival quickly ran into practical roadblocks. San Francisco city officials were wary. The Haight-Ashbury hippies and the straight establishment did not mix well. Permits for Golden Gate Park were not forthcoming, especially with a professional football game slated at nearby Kezar Stadium the same weekend. As December loomed, organizers scrambled for alternatives. The next idea was to hold the concert at Sears Point Raceway, which was also known as Sonoma Raceway, north of San Francisco. The venue had ample space and had been a late substitute for other festivals before, but corporate entanglements arose. The track's owner, Filmways Inc., demanded $100,000 up front and a piece of any film profits. The Stones, who were also financing their tour documentary, the Maysles Brothers films, which would later become the infamous documentary Gimme Shelter, balked at sharing the movie rights. Time was running out, and so 2 days before the concert, Sears Point fell through. Finally, Altamont Speedway, a disused racetrack in eastern Alameda County, about 60 miles away from San Francisco, was offered up by its owner, Dick Carter. Carter, an eager local businessman, saw it as a chance to put his little track on the map. With only 48 hours to go, the location was locked. Altamont, Saturday, December 6th. It was a desperate, last-minute choice taken, quote, in a spirit of desperation. There was no way to control it, no supervision or order. Jefferson Airplane's Paul Kantner would later admit, quote, the vibes were bad. Something was very peculiar. I had expected the loving vibes of Woodstock, but that wasn't coming to me, remembered singer Grace Slick, sensing doom even before the first note was played that day. The logistical challenges of that switch were immense. The hasty move resulted in numerous problems. There were few facilities on site, not enough toilets, water, and not even a medical tent for the hundreds of thousands expected. The speedway grounds themselves were bleak, a windswept bowl littered with rusty car parts, old tires, and debris. Unlike the natural amphitheater of Woodstock's farm, Altamont's stage was at the bottom of a hill, with the crowd looking down on it. The concert organizers barely had time to construct the stage, let alone improve it. The result was a makeshift wooden stage, less than 4 feet high, virtually level with the mob of fans that would press toward the band. The stage was only 1 meter high, making it impossible to keep the surging crowd back. There was no barrier. A thin rope was the only thing nominally separating performers from audiences. An audience that would soon number 300,000, many zonked on drugs and alcohol. Security was another ticking time bomb. Mick Jagger strongly opposed any visible police presence at Stone shows. He'd witnessed harsh police crackdowns at concerts before and wanted none of what he referred to as the fuzz at his free gathering. So instead of uniformed cops, the organizers made a fateful decision. They hired the Hells Angels. The San Francisco chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club had a rough mystique, but some oddly positive history with the local hippies. They'd done casual security at Grateful Dead shows and acid tests, accepting beer as payment and mostly enjoying the music. In London, the Stones had even invited a few British bikers who fancied themselves Hells Angels to patrol Hyde Park, and it went fine. The bikers spent more time dancing than policing. But British Angels and California Hells Angels were worlds apart. The American Angels, especially the Oakland chapter, led by Ralph "Sonny" Barger, were a true outlaw gang, tough, armed, and notoriously volatile. Still, on the Dead's recommendation, tour manager Sam Cutler met with some Angels to ask if they'd help out, give directions and things, as he would later say, at the concert. Bill Sweet William Fritch, a member of the San Francisco chapter, coolly replied, quote, "We don't police things. We're not a security force. We go to concerts to enjoy ourselves and to have fun." But when Cutler pressed, Sweet William shrugged. "Sure, we can do that," he said, as long as they were paid in beer. The deal was struck for $500 worth of beer, which might not sound like much, but this was 1969. I did the math, and $500 got you almost 4,000 beers back in 1969, a whole mountain. And just like that, the Rolling Stones had efficiently outsourced security to the Hells Angels. Cutler later insisted that they were only supposed to guard the generators and equipment, not to be a police force. But in the confusion, this distinction was lost. As one writer noted, quote, "The Stones organizers knew of historical precedent for using bikers in that way. They simply picked the wrong crew to insert into an already out-of-control happening." Multiple Angel chapters showed up at Altamont, Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, no single leader in charge on site. They roared in on their Harleys and parked them prominently near the stage, forming a literal and figurative ring of steel. They wore their full colors, their club jackets, and many were drinking heavily and popping acid-laced electric Kool-Aid by morning. What could possibly go wrong, one journalist would later write. The stage was set for, quote, "a perfect storm of negativity and naivete." Altamont was meant to be a celebration, but it was fast becoming a catastrophe in the making. In the days leading up to the show, astrologers in the Bay Area murmured ominously about the date. The organizers of Woodstock, just 4 months prior, had famously consulted astrological charts to choose a harmonious weekend for their gathering, and the stars had aligned. A full moon in Aquarius, a sign of idealism, collectivity, and peace. But the Altamont team did no such thing. December 6, 1969, fell under the moon in Scorpio, a placement that astrologers warned signified, quote, heavy days, evil tidings, acts of violence, as one writer would later put it. Quote, from the beginning there was blood on the ground, as if fate itself had scripted a tragedy. Whether one believes in celestial influence or not, in hindsight, the warning feels apt. The cosmic alignment was as unfavorable as the earthly logistics. With minimal planning, scant security, and an army of young people about to ingest heaven knows what, Altamont was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Chapter 3, A Hazy Morning at the Speedway. When dawn broke on December 6th of 1969, thousands of fans were already at Altamont Speedway, having camped overnight. The morning was bitterly cold, and a pale winter sun struggled to warm the Altamont hill. Long traffic jams snaked toward the site. Some concert-goers abandoned cars on the roadside and trudged the final miles on foot. By mid-morning, a colorful multitude was streaming into the natural bowl in front of the stage. Tie-dye leather jackets, flowers, and flags, the fashions of peace and love, mixed with a rough element, bikers in denim and club fashion, drifters and speed freaks. One teenage girl arrived pulling her infant child on a blanket behind her through the dust, an unsettling sight at a rock festival. Veteran attendees and staff already felt a sense of things slipping out of control. Quote, they thought they had already lost control, one account noted of the early hours, and the main acts hadn't even started yet. The morning of December 6 is described quite vividly in this book, so I wanted to read you from it. The drug scene had changed drastically in the 2 years since the Summer of Love. The original psychedelic chemists had been on a mission. They'd scrumptiously made the purest LSD they could. Owsley Stanley was especially finicky. He manufactured special batches like his famed Purple Haze. Hendrix dropped a double dose before his set at the Monterey Pop Festival. But as LSD rapidly spread beyond the small contingent in San Francisco and Berkeley, the manufacture of the illegal drug shifted to less zealous chemists who were unafraid to take shortcuts and didn't mind turning out inferior product. After the Nixon administration clamped down on PharmChem, a non-profit Bay Area laboratory that tested street drug samples, nobody could any longer be certain what the compounds actually contained. Some chemists added the poison strychnine to the recipe because it was said to extend the length of the trip. Some threw speed into the mix, which led to overstimulated users. One common symptom of speed-laced LSD was people stripping off their clothes and going naked. Another new wrinkle old acid heads didn't understand was using alcohol with psychedelics. Hippies in the Summer of Love wouldn't have dreamed of mixing booze and acid. It was cultural and chemical hearsay, but LSD use had spread far beyond its original confines. No longer was it a path to enlightenment, an opportunity for raised consciousness or exploration of inner peace. Now it was simply another way to become intoxicated, somewhat more extravagantly. People were getting wasted on acid. Adding alcohol into the mix could produce dire symptoms, erratic, unpredictable behavior, often including violent outbursts. LSD was not only for hippies any longer. This is something that both the book and a lot of the other sources that I looked into make a really big point. The crowd at Altamont was, in large percentages, absolutely high on everything and anything. And people did have a great time, but also a lot of people did have bad trips, and it was just too much to physically handle because there was no infrastructure to take care of those people, and the amount of people who were on drugs, probably several hundred thousands, was too much to be taken care of. The Hog Farm hippie commune, famous for providing security and trip-sitting at Woodstock, Wavy Gravy's famed Peace Fort, had sent some volunteers to Altamont. A few Hog Farm women roamed the crowd, bringing jugs of water and comforting those who were freaking out on bad trips. But they were far outnumbered and outmatched by the sheer size and edginess of this gathering. Drugs were everywhere, not the gentle cannabis and pure LSD of the Summer of Love, but methamphetamine and tainted acid. Bottles of cheap wine, Thunderbird and Ripple, were chucked for breakfast, often laced with whatever taps of powders people had on hand. By noon, bad trips were blossoming throughout the crowd, wide-eyed youth convulsing or screaming at hallucinations. The medical tent, staffed by volunteer doctors and medics, quickly overflowed with acid casualties. Emergency supplies of Thorazine, an antipsychotic used to sedate people having psychotic reactions, had been flown in by local hospitals. It still was nowhere near enough. Amid this volatile human stew, the Hells Angels settled in near the stage, revving their engines intermittently and asserting their presence. As the morning progressed, the Angels cracked open their mountain of beer, one after another. More than 1,500 bottles would be ultimately consumed by the bikers that day, an immense amount of alcohol, especially mixed with whatever psychedelics or amphetamines some were taking. By early afternoon, many Angels were visibly intoxicated, spoiling for action. Even before any music had been played that day, one festival goer was already dead. In the early morning chill, a teenage boy named Leonard Krizak had wandered away from the crowd and into a nearby irrigation canal, likely to wash off or cool down, but he never returned. His body was discovered days later, found 2 miles downstream. No one had noticed him go under. It was the first death of the day, a quiet vanishing that hinted at the chaos to come. As one witness later put it, quote, "They thought they had already lost control." At 1 p.m., about 3 hours behind the original schedule, Santana, a local San Francisco band, fresh from their star-making turn at Woodstock, kicked off the music. Their Latin-tinged rock flowed out over the crowd. For a brief moment, cheers and dancing replaced the sullen tension, but not for long. Only a few songs into Santana's set, first fights broke out near the stage. Witnesses saw a group of Hells Angels wading into the crowd, swinging their sawed-off pool cues at some young man who had gotten too close or accidentally bumped the bike. The violence seemed almost random. Quote, 3 people were beaten up by the Hells Angels with sawn-off pool cues to a psychedelic samba rhythm, remembered guitarist Carlos Santana, who watched in disbelief as scuffles erupted in time to his music. Quote, the fight started because the Hells Angels were pushing people around. Santana said simply of the chaos that marred his set. Concert-goers near the front recoiled in shock. A pattern was beginning. If anyone tried to climb on stage, touch an Angel's motorcycle, or otherwise challenge the Angel's self-appointed authority, they were beaten mercilessly. Between sets, there was little way of crowd control. The next act, Jefferson Airplane, took the stage to even more mayhem. By now, dozens of Angels had parked their gleaming Harley-Davidson bikes directly beside the stage, a literal dare to the crowd. Inevitably, with so many people packed together, one of the bikes got knocked over. The Angels flew into a rage, seeing it as grave insult. An ugly brawl ensued, just off the lip of the stage as the airplane played on. This definitely was one of the, if not the most crucial moment, I think, of Altamont, because it was that first spark of violence that really set in motion what was to come, because it kind of like started to create this divide between the Hells Angels and the rest of the concert goers. So I'm gonna read you another bit from the book because the description is just absolutely wild. The Angels were beating a black guy and Marty Balin threw his tambourine at them. Pissed off, Balin started yelling at the Angels on stage. Animal, the man with the taxidermy for a hat, ran up and smashed him in the face, and Balin went down in front of the drum kit. Animal was a tough 20-year-old Hells Angels named Paul Hibbets, originally from Camarillo in the west end of San Fernando Valley. He was so young when he joined the club, he used to have to wait outside bars while the other members drank. He could be sweet and funny, but he did love to fight and didn't hesitate to act when he heard the Angels disrespected. He was high and dazed, but he smacked Balin down like a lightning bolt. Balin recovered shaken, stood and charged to the lip of the stage. He pointed to the brawl and shouted at the Angels. Then he jumped down in the middle of the fight to try to stop it. Kantner watched in shock. Grace Slick scrambled to see, but without her contact lenses, everything was a foggy blur. Terrified and disoriented, she tried to pour oil on the troubled waters. "Easy," she said into the microphone. "Please be kind, please be kind, please be kind, please be kind. It's all right. It's kind of weird up here." The rhythm section finally came to a halt, and a contentious Kantner took the mic. "Hey man, I'd like to mention that the Hells Angels just smashed Marty Ballin in the face and knocked him out for a bit," he said. "I'd like to thank you for that." Sitting on the stage drinking a beer, Sweet William stood up and took another microphone. "Hey wait," he said. "Is this on? If you're talking to me, I'm going to talk to you." "I'm not talking to you, man," said Kantner. "I'm talking to the people that hit my lead singer in the head." "Right, you're talking to my people," Sweet William said. "Right," said Kantner. "Let me tell you what's happening," said Sweet William. You're what's happening." Grace Slick tried to smooth the raw emotions. Her voice dropped to a gentle, conciliatory coo. "No hassles with anybody in particular," she said. "You've got to keep your bodies off of each other, unless you intend love. People get weird, and you need people like the angels to keep people in line. But the angels also, you don't bust people in the head for nothing. So both sides are fucking up temporarily. Let's not keep fucking up." Slick was scared and exasperated, knowing how futile her pleas were. Even these seasoned veterans of the San Francisco scene, a band with years of experience with the Hells Angels, were helpless to stop the violence. The platitudes of peace and flowers rang hollow, the Hyde-Ashbury tapestry unraveling in violent, uncontrollable fashion for all to see. Her words wilted as she said them. Road manager Bill Lautner had been crouched behind the amp line when Balin went over. He raced to the front of the stage, but when he saw what was happening down there, he decided he couldn't help and stayed where he was. Somebody handed him Balin's arm, and Lautner dragged his inert body on stage. Lautner got him backstage to an equipment truck backed up to the stage that was serving as an impromptu dressing room. Sitting on an equipment case in the dark, where he couldn't see her, was Rosie McGee, still reeling from her acid overdose and trying to recover. Into the relative calm of the dark van, the unconscious body of Marty Balin was suddenly sprawled across her lap. Animal, meanwhile, having been admonished that you can't go around stomping the band and expect the show to be any good, came to find Balin and apologized. He looked like some bearded, evil medieval warrior wearing a dead animal on his head. Having ingested formidable amounts of sundry drugs and other intoxicants, he was slightly emotional, even tearful, in his stumbling, mumbling explanation to Balin. "You just can't say fuck you to an angel," Animal concluded. Bantam rooster Balin, barely 3/4 the size of the hulking angel, still dazed, probably in shock, stood up and faced Animal. "Oh yeah," he said. "Fuck you." In a heartbeat, an enraged Animal turned and slugged Balin in the face as hard as he could. Balin went down again. Rex Jackson of the Grateful Dead's road crew saw what happened on stage and was incensed. Jackson was a motorcyclist and rode with the Angels. He was the toughest guy on the Dead crew, the enforcer who had fought his way out of many difficult situations, once taking off his boot and knocking Rock Scully to the ground with it to make his point. Jackson knew the Angels, loved the Dead, and feeling betrayed in some primal way, he went after Animal. The other Dead crew reconciled in horror as Animal Rabbit punched him and hit him with a barrage. Jackson might have got in a shot or two that left him stretched out unconscious on the stage. With Rex Jackson out, cold-cocked, his eye blackened, the band's last line of defense went down, and everybody backstage knew it. If anybody could have stopped up the Angels, it would have been Jackson, and now he was out of it. Whatever force the bands could have bring up against the Angels was lying face down unconscious. A blanket of despair settled on the stage as the sudden reality became apparent. After that, there would be no question backstage among the crew about whose stage it was. These hippies had no defense against this kind of ferocious savagery. The Angels had caused problems before, but this was a raging violation. The musicians had never had reason to fear. They felt immune from the real world when they were performing. Nothing had ever penetrated that bubble before. It was an illusion kept in the best interests of both the musicians and the audience. This distinction was lost on the Angels. Balin staggered back in time to join his band for the final number, Volunteers, the incendiary pseudo-revolutionary title track of the band's new hit album. Up against the wall, motherfuckers, indeed. Lautner warned him before he left the truck to leave the Angels alone. This was not a war they could win. The set lurched to a close without any more violence. I keep wondering, when reading this book and also when doing more research, why at no point someone was like, we have to blow this off right now. And I think it was because the Rolling Stones have been so criticized. And they also were at a point in their career where things weren't going too well. Alan Klein was in play. There was just a lot going on. But I wonder why no one at this point was like, okay, this was an idea. It didn't work. We should probably just let it go. But maybe they were also scared that the crowd would have become even more angry. I don't know, it just feels weird that after all of this, and this is only the tip of the iceberg, the show wasn't just blown off. Photographers captured a disturbing scene, a naked man dazed on drugs trying to climb on stage only to be beaten to the ground by two Hell's Angels, who then kicked his bloody, toothless face and sent him crawling under the stage for safety. The crowd was, quote, in total shock that this was happening right in front of them, recalled photographer Bill Owens, who witnessed the naked man's battering through a telephoto lens. Backstage, members of the Grateful Dead were tuning up, preparing to play after Jefferson Airplane. Jerry Garcia and his band had actually helped organize this event, but now they were watching their worst nightmare unfold. When a visibly shaken Marty Balin was carried backstage after regaining consciousness, the Dead were horrified. Quote, "That's it, man, we're not playing," Garcia reportedly said. The Grateful Dead, who had naively suggested using their biker friends for security, promptly pulled out of the show entirely. As Jefferson Airplane's set ended in disarray, the Dead's crew announced the band would not perform. The prime instigators of Woodstock West simply packed up and fled back to San Francisco, horrified by what they'd seen. Quote, "That's the way things went at Altamont, so badly that the Grateful Dead didn't even get to play," Rolling Stone magazine dryly noted. It was around this time someone reportedly asked Timothy Leary, the famed LSD guru, who was backstage, if he could calm the Hells Angels down. Leary took one look at the drunken, enraged bikers and shook his hand. "They're crazy," he warned, wisely wanting no part in the melee. A long afternoon dragged on. One by one, the Flying Burrito Brothers and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young played their sets as the violence continued sporadically at the front. Miraculously, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young's tight harmonies went off without major incident. Perhaps the Angels found their mellow folk rock unthreatening. Though Stephen Stills was later reported to have been stabbed in the leg by a thrown motorcycle spoke during his set. The sun was dipping low and the Rolling Stones had yet to perform. The schedule was now badly delayed. Worse, the crowd was growing more restless and more intoxicated with each passing hour. The Stones' bassist, Bill Wyman, was late arriving. He got lost in the chaos, leaving a gap in the program after Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young had finished. For nearly an hour, nothing happened on stage. In that void, disorder reigned. Fights and scuffles were breaking out like bushfires across a sea of people, many instigated or ended by the Angels with their fists and pool sticks. Quote, "I am telling you, people are going to die out there if you don't get out there now," one concert staffer reportedly urged the Stones team as the delay lengthened, practically begging Mick Jagger and his band to take the stage and restore some calm. Backstage, Mick Jagger was feeling the pressure. When the Stones' helicopter had landed that afternoon, a jittery young man had rushed up to Jagger and punched him in the face, screaming, "I hate you. Welcome to Altamont." Mick was unhurt but deeply shaken. It was a violent energy unlike anything he had encountered from a fan. His partner Keith Richards meanwhile had spent time milling in the crowd, protected by a few bodyguards, and described the scene as, quote, "very medieval in look and feel. I was amazed things didn't go more wrong than they did." Now, as twilight fell, the Rolling Stones knew they were walking onto a powder keg. Chapter 4. Under My Thumb, Death in the Front Row. The Rolling Stones finally took the stage as darkness cloaked the Altamont Hills. It was about 6 p.m. Thousands of people surged forward, pressing close in the chilly night. The Stones launched into Jumping Jack Flash, their opener, and for a brief moment, rock and roll energy overtook the Dread. Mick Jagger, in a satin shirt, tried to work his usual magic on the crowd, prancing and clapping his hands above his head. Keith Richards prowled at his side, chugging out guitar riffs, but the atmosphere was tense, electric. The stage lights cast an eerie glow on the writhing mass of bodies just a few feet away. Hell's Angels perched on the stage edge, eyeballing anyone who came too near. One biker sat menacingly right in front of Jagger, swinging beer and glaring as if daring anyone to misbehave. Part away through their set, the Rolling Stones tore into their ominous anthem, Sympathy for the Devil, and a vicious fight erupted in front of the stage. In the film Gimme Shelter, you can see Mick Jagger stopping the song as commotion breaks out. People were screaming, fists flying. Mick Jagger stepped onto the mic. Quote, "Everybody, just cool out," he pleaded, palms outstretched. The band stood uncertainly under the spotlight as turmoil rippled in the darkness beyond. After a pause, Sympathy for the Devil was restarted and finished, but the the mood had soared. Mick Jagger, who often flirted with demonic imagery in his songs, seemed intimidated by the real violence unfolding in front of his eyes. It was as if the dark forces the Stones once played at were now manifesting right in front of them. Mick looked disturbed and, quote, chastened, if not downright intimidated, by the anarchy unleashed by his do-what-feels charisma. This wasn't theatrical rebellion. This was real and raw. Hoping to ease the tension, the Stones played a slower blues and a couple of country-tinged numbers. The Sun is Shining and Love in Vain. For a short while, things stayed relatively calm. Then the band struck up Under My Thumb. The irony of the title would soon become cruelly apparent. I think a lot of people who were there felt that something was off. It's also evident in the fact that pretty much all the bands that played left right afterwards. They didn't hang out to see the Stones play. They were just kind of hoping to get out of there unhurt. The song was wafting across the Speedway as Grace Slick and Paul Kantner of Jefferson Airplane and their buddy David Freiberg of Quicksilver Messenger Service boarded their helicopter to leave. Airplane road manager Bill Lautner had started to worry about their exit as the Stones began to play. He realized that if he waited too long, only the Stones would fly out and he and his musicians would be left stranded. As his charges watched the Stones from the monitor mixing board inside a truck at the back of the stage, Lautner grew more nervous. He convinced his party to head for the helicopters. They had already seen the Stones a couple of weeks before at Madison Square Garden. Freiberg, who had driven out to the show from Marin, would leave his car and spend the night at the Airplane Mansion in San Francisco. Kantner would drive him out again the next day. As Lautner expected, the pilot told him the copter was reserved for the Stones. "Yes, but this is Grace Slick," Lautner said. And the pilot relented. As the helicopter lifted off, the pilot circled over the crowd for one last view of the stage. They looked down. The crowd in front of the stage spread apart before their eyes. A large, visible space opened and quickly closed up again. They watched as the mass of people spread apart and fused back together in a single, seamless movement. The Stones didn't seem to be playing or even on the stage. They watched the crowd swirl and foam like a tide pool and flew into the night. They had no idea they had just witnessed the killing of Meredith Hunter. I want to issue a little bit of a trigger warning here. This next part is going to discuss violence, death, murder. If that is not on your card today, please just skip to this timestamp. All you have to know for the context going forward is that a person was killed. In the crowd near the front, Meredith Hunter, an 18-year-old African-American man from Berkeley, had edged closer to the stage with his girlfriend Patty Bredehoft. Meredith was hard to miss. He was tall, slender, and dressed in a flashy, bright lime green suit. He had also made the mistake of conspicuously brandishing a long-barreled .22 caliber revolver in the air earlier after an angel scruffled with him. He was high on methamphetamine and agitated. Now, as Under My Thumb played, Meredith found himself surrounded by half a dozen of Hell's Angels near the stage monitor on Keith Richards' side. They remembered him, the black guy in a green suit, as Bill Wyman noted seeing. An angel grabbed Meredith, and he lunged back, drawing his revolver in panic. What happened next unspooled in seconds, yet would be analyzed frame by frame for the next decades. Alan Pissarro, a stocky angel, charged at Meredith and lunged with a knife. In a frenzy, Pissarro stepped Meredith Hunter 5 times, 2 of those plunges piercing his back. Other angels piled on, beating and stomping Meredith as Patty screamed for his life. Quote, "He's just a kid," she cried. 2 concert-goers, horrified, pulled Patty back, fearing she'd be killed too. On stage, the Stones sensed something terrible was happening. Mick Jagger stopped singing, looking out wide-eyed. "Why are we fighting? Why are we fighting?" he implored over the mic. Keith Richards snarled into his microphone at the Angels. "Everyone, just cool down. Either those cats cool it, man, or we don't play." An angel, perhaps Sweet William, grabbed Keith's mic and barked back, "Fuck you," before yanking the cable out. The Rolling Stones were momentarily paralyzed, watching the carnage mere yards away. Security had utterly broken down. The inmates were running the asylum. Within that writhing knot of angels, Meredith Hunter collapsed to the ground, bleeding profusely from his wounds. A few angels dragged his limp body away from the stages and unceremoniously dumped him by a makeshift medical tent. Astonishingly, the Stones resumed playing Under My Thumb after a brief halt, perhaps not realizing Meredith had been fatally wounded, or perhaps realizing that stopping completely might incite even more worse chaos. Quote, "Everyone, just be cool," Jagger weakly urged again. Some of the crowd didn't even know a stabbing had occurred. Others were fleeing in fear. On film, Jagger's face looks pale, dazed, the showman on autopilot. Behind the scenes, frantic efforts were made to save Meredith. A medical volunteer knelt by the young man, futilely trying CPR as his heart stopped. The single on-site ambulance was stuck behind the stage. A call went out for the helicopter. The Stones had rented a helicopter for their grand exit, and the medical staff urged for this helicopter to be used for Meredith, but it was reserved for the band's getaway and not immediately available. Tragically, Meredith Hunter died at Altamont about 20 minutes after being stabbed, before any proper help could reach him. It was 6:30 p.m. Later, it would be chillingly noted that the Stones were performing Under My Thumb as he was killed. A grim coincidence that some saw as symbolic of the violence and control extended that day. I don't have any words. The fact that this is all on camera, and we're going to get into the aftermath later, but the fact that you can see someone getting killed, someone who was just there for the music, absolutely breaks my heart. I don't know to which extent racism might have played a role here. I don't know if the Hells Angels may have been more after him because of his skin color. They would later argue that it was self-defense, he had a gun, they were scared, but this is just so sad to me. This man was so young. He just wanted to be there for the music. And this is something that I have been asking myself ever since I read this book. Yes, the Hells Angels were frightening and they were definitely scary, but they were also outnumbered, largely outnumbered by the rest of the people there. And I just wonder why, and probably it was because everyone was on drugs, but I just feel like if the rest of the crowd would have stuck together, they could have stopped this. But I also think it was so fast. I don't know. I think a big part of why Altamont went sideways and Woodstock didn't is the music. The Rolling Stones play a different kind of music, and obviously also the Hells Angels. But I wonder to which extent the music plays a role, because a lot of the songs at Woodstock were calm and they were about peace, and I think the people who attended were different kinds of people attracted by that kind of music. I don't know. Altamont was such a tragedy and such a chaotic mess even without this, but this is what I feel like cemented it as the day the music died. Incredibly, the Rolling Stones played on after the incident. Few in the massive audience comprehended that a murder had just occurred in their midst. To avoid further provocation, the band did not announce the death. They finished their set list, even debuting a new song, Brown Sugar, and closing with the ironic Street Fighting Man. Quote, "A stupid choice," Bill Wyman later said of that final number. The final chords rang out in the cold night air as a sense of numbness settled over the crowd. Quote, "We're gonna get out of here now," Jagger said tersely into a mic. "Peace, peace to you all." It was an important farewell. The band quickly escaped into waiting helicopters, leaving the scene as swiftly as possible. Jagger and Richards, eyes darting through a throng of shell-shocked, irate hippies to reach the chopper. In the dark sky above Altamont, the Stones flew away, literally and figuratively above the mess. Down below, the Altamont Speedway was strewn with the detritus of a nightmare. Injured fans mourning, fires from scattered bonfires, debris and abandoned cars as far as the eye could see, and 4 lifeless bodies on the way to the coroner's office. Chapter 5. Aftermath. The end of the dream. In the immediate aftermath, many accusations were made at Altamont for the violence and the deaths. The local authorities had been merely absent during the entire concert itself. A mere handful of Alameda County sheriffs hung back on the periphery, intervening only in a few fights. As one writer put it, quote, "The organizers insisted on controlling the event while avoiding any responsibility for it, and that included keeping the police at arm's length." When the sun rose on December 7th, the extent of the disaster became clear. Along with Meredith Hunter, 3 other young people had lost their lives. 2 men in their early 20s run over by a hit-and-run driver, an acid-crazed maniac who stole a car and plowed through a campsite in the early morning hours of December 7th, and Leonard Kizak, who had drowned in an irrigation canal on the outskirts of the site. 4 births reportedly took place during the festival, but later investigations found no evidence that any babies were actually born that night. Instead, there was death, injury, and devastation. I read a couple sources that a first report claimed that there were births and that it was kind of assumed that the writer of that report wanted to make this look like a peaceful gathering and kind of like had this idea if there are 4 people dead and I just write that 4 babies were born, that kind of weighs it out, which is an insane strategy to say. At first, there's a part in the book where Jan Wenner of the Rolling Stone magazine, who didn't attend but had some of his reporters attending, talks to them about it and finds out about this. It is wild, honestly, and yeah, a lot of people looked into the reports. I think the Rolling Stones magazine's writers were some of the first who did it, but they found out that no births were reported. Carter's Altamont Speedway was trashed, some $400,000 and damage to the grounds as vandals torched and smashed hundreds of cars and vendor booths. Far from the tidy cleanup of the Hyde Park, Altamont was left a sea of garbage and wreckage that Dick Carter himself had to deal with. He would later lament that hosting the concert bankrupted him. In the days and weeks that followed, a shocked music community grappled with what went wrong at Altamont. The media, which only 4 months earlier had hailed Woodstock as a triumph of peace and love, now pondered if Altamont signaled the death of the hippie movement's innocence. The phrase, "the end of the 60s," began appearing in the newspapers and essays. Contemporaries drew direct lines to other dark events of 1969, notably the Manson family murders that previous August, when followers of Charles Manson brutally killed innocents in Los Angeles. What crashed and burned at Altamont, with more than a bit of deathly jumpstart a few months earlier by the Manson murders, was the idealism, the utopian reverie of the 1960s. One retrospect would later note. It was as if all the violence and dread that had been lurking at the edge of the flower power dream finally burst into the open. The Woodstock Nation had met a grim bookend at Altamont. Quote, "The events of Altamont are forever synonymous with the death of the Woodstock Nation and, in many ways, marked the end of rock's innocence," wrote Classic Rock magazine. The San Francisco Chronicle summed it up in biting terms. Quote, "Altamont was the product of diabolical egotism, ineptitude, manipulation, and, at base, a fundamental lack of concern for humanity." The finger-pointing was intense. Many laid blame squarely on the Rolling Stones, especially Mick Jagger, for instigating the event without proper planning, essentially for overreaching. The Stones had wanted a grand finale, a cinematic end to their tour. They had a film crew in tow after all, and they got it. Quote, "The Stones snuff movie," as one writer later called the footage of Meredith Hunter's killing. Critics noted the cynicism of the Stones doing a free show only after being shamed, and their folly in handing security to a biker gang for the sake of edgy optics. Rolling Stone magazine published a scathing piece in its aftermath, effectively indicting Mick Jagger and the organizers. Quote, "We are all guilty," wrote critic Ralph Gleason in a moment of self-reflection, myself included. Yet he and others didn't absolve the band. The magazine's editorial especially singled out Mick Jagger, Sam Cutler, the tour manager, and Rock Scully, the dead managers, as chiefly responsible. For their part, the Stones fled America almost immediately after Altamont, leaving piles of unpaid bills and a lot of bitter locals. Back in London, Mick Jagger appeared shaken and defensive. Quote, "I know San Francisco only by reputation," he told reporters. "It's supposed to be lovely, not uptight. What happened? What's gone wrong?" He then made a sweeping statement blaming American culture. Quote, "You can put 500,000 young English people together and they won't start killing each other. That's the difference." This remark did not sit well. To many, it sounded like a rock star refusing to take ownership of a tragedy he helped spark. Keith Richards offered a sardonic take later. Quote, "Altamont, it could only happen to the Stones," he quipped, implying that chaos followed the band like a curse. Decades on, Keith Richards would still insist that 499,000 people had a great time. One guy died, but a baby was born, so the same number came in as went out, downplaying the horror with a junkie philosopher's remove. He conveniently omitted the other accidental deaths and added the birth to the mix. The Hells Angels, unsurprisingly, were unrepentant and angry at being made scapegoats. Sonny Barger, the Oakland chapter president, famously called into a San Francisco radio show, KSAN, a day after Altamont. In a raspy, indignant voice broadcasted live, Barger defended the Angels. Quote, "I didn't go there to police nothing, man," he insisted. "I ain't no cop. I ain't never gonna pretend to be a cop. And this Mick Jagger, he put it all on us, man." Barger claimed that the Angels only got violent when provoked, specifically when their motorcycles were knocked over or when threatened by that, quote, "crazy man," as he was referring to Meredith Hunter. In his view, the Rolling Stones had hired thugs to do a dirty job and then acted all innocent when the predictable mayhem ensued. One Angel was heard saying, quote, "We were told to sit on the stage and keep people off. That's what we did. If people messed with our bikes, we stomped them. So what?" It was a brutal mindset laid bare. Peace and love met a gang that lived by violence and intimidation, and the results were inevitable. When Alan Pissarro, Meredith's killer, was later tried for murder, he was actually acquitted. The jury ended up ruling that he had acted in reasonable self-defense since Hunter had pulled a gun. Pissarro walked away a free man, though he met a grim end himself just a few years later when he found drowned with $10,000 in his pocket, rumored to be a drug deal gone bad. I don't know what to think. It is this whole trial. It's just... First of all, no one of the Rolling Stones or the organizers of Altamont have ever reached out to Meredith's family or his girlfriend and their family. No one. And when she went into the police to report what happened, she said that she couldn't fully pin down who it was who actually stabbed him because it was such a big crowd of people, but it was obviously captured on film and you can very clearly see who it was. And Alan Pissarro kind of like made a point to present himself as like this very classic all-American guy. He came in there with his wife and like a young kid and their young kid, and he was all clean shaven and everything, and he just passed this off as acting in self-defense, and I don't think that that was rightful. And it's also, I think, important to note that Alan Pissarro had been convicted before and also afterwards, so I don't know, I think he should have gotten a different sentencing for that. But honestly, I am more so disappointed at the fact that none of the Rolling Stones ever reached out to the family of Meredith Hunter. It seemed that none of them took it that personal, and that is so wild to me. Because why wouldn't you? I feel like if I would have been, I mean, it's hard to imagine, but I feel like I would have wanted to try and make it right with the family, and there obviously is no way to do that, but I would have at least tried, I think. The film of Altamont, Gimme Shelter, premiered in 1970, forcing audiences to confront the nightmare. Critic Pauline Kael compared it to the Zapruder film of John F. Kennedy's assassination, a horrifying document that people would dissect frame by frame. As one writer put it, quote, "It was the Stones' snuff movie, dark and murky, the green flash of Hunter's suit, the crowd parting, the Hells Angels and the knife. It ensured Altamont would never be forgotten." In the fallout, everyone licked their wounds. The Grateful Dead, soul-searching after their close call, decided to take tighter control of their concerts and even shifted towards a gentler, more acoustic style on their next album, Working Man's Dead and American Beauty, perhaps as a subconscious reaction to the trauma. In his book, Joel Selvin suggests that the Dead's transformation and long-term DIY ethos were spurred by Altamont's harsh lesson. The Rolling Stones, for their part, became more guarded and cynical about the utopian 1960s. They never attempted anything like Altamont ever again. As rock critic Robert Christgau later noted, quote, "They would never again risk such fearlessness. Altamont robbed them of their delusions of invincibility." The Stones resumed touring in the 1970s, but under much tighter security and professionalism. The era of truly anarchic free festivals was over for them. I do think it was on them for not hiring proper security, but I also do have to give it to them that they had had great experience with the Hells Angels back in England, and also they spoke to the Grateful Dead and they were like, "We've been doing it with the Hells Angels over here and it worked well too." Someone suggested in an article, and I think it also comes up in the book, that an issue was the place, because apparently The Hells Angels are kind of like organized by different chapters. So you have the San Francisco chapter, the LA chapter, whatever. And if this would have been taken place in San Francisco, then the San Francisco chapter, who was the chapter that was so friendly with the Grateful Dead and the hippies, would have had the higher hand and like the higher ground in a sense. But because this was outside of San Francisco, it was kind of like no man's land. And it wasn't clear to the Hells Angels who was actually in charge. And that might have also erupted the chaos. I don't know, but I just don't think it was a good idea. But I do think that that also is very true for a festival like Woodstock. I think it was dangerous to not have proper security there. It all went well there, and I myself go to a festival every single year with very minimal security because it is a very hippie, peace and love festival. But they have some security, some professional security in front of the stage just to make sure nothing like this happens. And I think that that is a big part of what went wrong at Altamont. You need to have someone there who's not intoxicated, who has the power and also just the job of keeping everyone in line. And the fact that the people who were supposed to keep everyone in line were the Hells Angels, who were on drugs and very drunk. Disaster was about to strike. One of the Hells Angels, who went by the name Terry the Tramp, although his real name was Terry Tracy, who had been friendly with the dead and present at Altamont, took it especially hard. He was so disturbed by the events that he quit the club. Just a few months later, in February of 1970, Terry the Tramp committed suicide by an overdose, becoming in effect Altamont's fifth fatality. It was as if among the angels a conscious, or at least deep despair lingered. Quote, Altamont's death toll took 5, one account noted grimly, counting Terry's tragic end as part of the festival's dark legacy. Epilogue, the day the music died. The legacy of Altamont. Altamont was immediately etched into rock lore as a turning point, the end of an era. Optimists had hailed Woodstock in August of 1969 as proof that peace and love could rule the day, that flower power was more than a slogan. But Altamont, coming just months after, felt like a cruel rebuttal. As one observer put it, quote, the hippies were trying to create a life without rules, based on the idea that if you let people be free, they'll be good to one another. That, of course, was a notion profound in its naivete. So Altamont was, in a sense, a kind of comeuppance to the arrogance of youth. Quote, it's a harsh judgment, but standing amid the blood and chaos of that night, it was hard to deny that the counterculture's idyllic dream had hit a wall. Real-world darkness, in the form of violence, bad drugs, and bad actors, had intruded. The 1960s were ending, not with the jubilant chorus of All You Need Is Love, but with the fearful cry of a girl in a crochet dress begging Hells Angels not to kill her boyfriend. Many cultural historians marked Altamont as the symbolic death of the 1960s. Quote, 40 years ago today, the 1960s came to an unholy end, wrote Entertainment Weekly on the anniversary of the concert. The optimistic Age of Aquarius mentality gave way to the gritty realism of the 1970s, a time when the news would be filled with Vietnam, Watergate, and a turn inward. Quote, what you see in Gimme Shelter, apart from the end of the hippie dream, is the dawn of a new age, noted journalist Owen Gleiberman, observing how Altamont prefigured a more unruly, self-interested zeitgeist. Indeed, at Altamont, the audience, frenzied, volatile, became as much the story of the performers, foreshadowing a future where large rock concerts could tether into riots, a hint of the crowd surges and mosh pits of later decades. The illusion that rock gatherings were automatically sacred spaces of brotherhood was shattered. Rock's darker undercurrents, commerce, ego, violence, had been laid bare. Yet, in truth, the counterculture didn't vanish overnight. Peace and love didn't turn into pumpkins on December 7th, 1969. The Grateful Dead and others continued making music and even organizing their own, although better managed, festivals. The ethos of communal living and artistic freedom carried into the 1970s in different forms. As Joel Selvin argues, Altamont, quote, wasn't the end of the 1960s counterculture so much as an expose of its weakness. It taught a hard lesson. Idealism without structure can lead to disaster. After Altamont, the innocence was gone. The phrase Woodstock West would forever be tinged with irony. The Rolling Stones themselves emerged more as wary survivors than triumphant kings of rock. Quote, Mick Jagger had long pretended to be the devil. Then one night he threw a party and the real devil showed up. The Stones have never recovered, wrote journalist Rich Cohen, encapsulating how deeply Altamont scarred the band's mythology. The Stones' next tours would be tightly controlled, with Hell's Angels band and professional security in place. No more free festivals on a whim. In a broader sense, Altamont stands as a stark lesson about the limit of the 1960s hippie experiment. The idea that rock concerts could be self-regulating love-ins, that peace, love, and music alone could handle 500,000 people died at Altamont. Reality intruded. Quote, Altamont was the end of the idea that left to their own devices, people will be angels, one commentator said. It showed we couldn't live in peace and love like many had thought. The idea that everyone at a festival was a gentle soul dissolved when drunken bikers swung pool cues and young men pulled guns. In the music world, organizers became much more mindful of safety, infrastructure, and security in the 1970s. The tragic specter of Altamont was invoked whenever things threatened to get out of hand. It was a black mark, a never again moment. Decades later, the poignancy of Altamont still haunts. The image of Meredith Hunter in his bright green suit caught on film for eternity as he is attacked is an uncomfortable reminder that the 1960s free love ethos had blind spots, particularly when it came to the racial and social tensions that the hippie movement hadn't magically erased. Hunter was a young black man in a mostly white crowd consorting with a white girlfriend among a crowd of bikers. One cannot fully disentangle that from why he was targeted so brutally. In that sense, Altamont also exposed the hypocrisy and unresolved conflicts lurking under the tie-dye surface. As the Rolling Stones continued their career into the 1970s and beyond, they carried Altamont like an unwanted albatross. In interviews, Jagger would sometimes bristle or deflect when the topic arose. Richards, with his devil-may-care attitude, often downplayed it. But for the generation that witnessed it, Altamont remained a solemn warning. In the music press and history books, it is invariably contrasted with Woodstock. Woodstock was the dream, Altamont the nightmare. One free concert showed the best of what the 1960s stood for, the other the very worst. In truth, both mega festivals were chaotic and could have gone either way. Woodstock had its share of luck and near disasters, bad acid trips, rainstorms, food shortage, but got lucky, whereas Altamont tried their best but got very unlucky, as Joel Selvin implies. If Woodstock was an accidental success, Altamont was a cautionary failure. I think Joel Selvin summed up the aftermath pretty well in his book, so I wanted to read you another passage. Jagger had made the fatal error of believing his own hype. He bought into the myth of Woodstock, but he also believed that he could do it better. Woodstock had been a crowning achievement, but the Rolling Stones were not a part of it. Now they could write their own place into the history, and he expected that his concert would continue the good vibes and perhaps even be a bigger show of hippie values. Jagger wanted to cultivate the underground. Being considered cool by cognoscenti was new for the Stones. He was coming to San Francisco for a coronation. This was sheer media manipulation by a master. It was backfired, of course, but Cale's comparison to Triumph of the Will may be more apt than the Mazelas would like to admit. Jagger wanted to be filmed strutting the stage as the emissary of the Dark Lord before his adoring masses. The Stones were determined to star in their own extravaganza. The people at Altamont were simply unwitting participants in their titanic visions. Quote, "The Rolling Stones, man, they wrote the script," Rock Scully told Rolling Stone. "They got what they paid for. Let it bleed, man. There's never going to be another one like it. Anyone should have seen this would have happened. This whole trip, man. If somebody tried to buy another Woodstock, we should have seen it, but we couldn't see that." Ralph Gleason wrote about the film Gimme Shelter in his Rolling Stone column. Gone was the indignation and outrage. In reviewing the circumstances and context of Altamont, Gleason had found his compassion. Finally, he saw the bigger picture, the death of a dream and the disillusionment of a generation, and he offered both an absolution and a mea culpa. "There are no specific guilty parties for Altamont," he wrote. "We were all guilty, myself included." The enduring legacy of Altamont is forever tied to the Rolling Stones. Something in the band's character created Altamont: arrogance, greed, ignorance, and naivete. At the height of rock's golden year, 1969, the Stones did reign as the world's greatest rock and roll band. An open-air free concert in Golden Gate Park might have made a picturesque victory lap, but Scully's innocent hippie dream was not to be. Instead, the band blindly, willfully stumbled into catastrophe. Altamont, it could only happen to the Stones, Keith Richards told Robert Greenfield of Rolling Stone in 1971. Let's face it wouldn't have happened to the Bee Gees, it wouldn't have happened to Crosby, Stills and Nash. It could only happen to the Stones. In the end, the story of the Rolling Stones at Altamont is about more than a concert. It's about a cultural turning point. Standing on that stage, Mick Jagger, who had styled himself the reigning Lucifer of rock, suddenly found himself powerless in the face of real chaos. The self-styled heroes of the counterculture, bands, fans, and organizers alike, learned that good intentions were not enough to quell the beast when things spiraled out of control. Quote, "We needed shelter from ourselves," one writer observed of that day. The 1960s dream didn't die in a single moment, but Altamont became its enduring tombstone. In one of the closing scenes of Gimme Shelter, Mick Jagger watches the footage of Meredith Hunter's stabbing in silence. The camera lingers on his face, the cockiness is gone, replaced by a sorrow-chastened stare. It's as if he's absorbing the weight of what have we done. In that expression lies the true legacy of Altamont. The painful loss of innocence, the realization that the freewheeling joy of the 1960s had a dark underbelly. The hippie dream hadn't been killed by external enemies or the establishment. It had imploded from within, undone by its own excess and misjudgments. Altamont's legacy is complex. It did not stop the music. The 1970s would go on to produce amazing rock, but it ended an era of idealism. After Altamont, the mantra peace and love would carry a hint of nostalgia and loss, as if recalling a beautiful but unsustainable fantasy. The Rolling Stones themselves carried on, arguably becoming an even greater band in the 70s, but with a harder edge and thicker armor around them. They even wrote a song in 1971 called Winter that many interpret as reflecting on the end of the 1960s glow. In it, Jagger sings, "And I wish I'd been out in California when the lights on all the Christmas trees went out." A line that some hear as a nod to that December when the light dimmed on a decade. Every year, as the anniversary of Altamont rolls around, music historians and fans recall the day, not to celebrate it, but to ponder it. It stands as rock music's great tragedy, a stark reminder that even as music unites and uplifts, it can also amplify the energies, good and bad, of those who gather. Altamont is the story of a generation's hubris. The belief that they could throw a 500,000-person party with no rules and have it end in bliss, and the harsh wake-up call that followed. In the final calculation, Altamont indeed often serves as the full stop on the 60s. As the concert-goers left the night, shivering and traumatized, the Haight-Ashbury mantra of peace, love, and harmony felt like a distant echo. One concert reviewer famously wrote, quote, "Altamont became the product of its own hubris, and a mirror on our ugliest instincts." The 1960s dream didn't simply fade, it was stabbed awake. And so the hippie era ended, not with a gentle goodbye, but with a violent jolt. Yet, out of the darkness, there were lessons. The counterculture didn't completely die, it evolved. People realized that true peace and love require care, planning, and yes, some rules to flourish. Musicians and fans alike grew up a little after Altamont, and the music played on, perhaps a bit more somber, a bit more grounded, but still carrying the hope that led everyone to Altamont in the first place. Altamont remains a stark symbol. Whenever ideals run ahead of reality, whenever someone mentions the end of the hippie dream, the image of the Hells Angels at the Speedway and the echo of Under My Thumb inevitably come to mind. It's a story we tell to make sense of how one beautiful, improvisational decade tripped over its own feet and fell into the next. In that sense, Altamont is more than a concert. It's a modern myth, a cautionary tale etched in the annals of rock and cultural history. The Rolling Stones at Altamont asked for Gimme Shelter, and in the end, shelter was exactly what the 1960s needed from itself. The dream was over, but the music and its lessons live on. So that brings me to the end of today's video. That is it for the Rolling Stones at Altamont. I don't know what to say, to be honest. As said, I'm heartbroken for everything that happened there. And I think with the planning it was inevitable that something like this was gonna happen, but it still breaks my heart. It breaks my heart that Meredith Hunter wanted to go and see one of his favorite bands and never made it home. It breaks my heart that Leonard, that teenage boy, was probably high on drugs and just wanted to cool off, but ended up drowning. It breaks my heart that people who were just happily together after the show were crushed to death by a car that another person on drugs was driving. It breaks my heart that Terry never recovered. And I think the true lesson here is that this whole hippie dream imploded from within, and that the whole hippie idea that everyone is good and peaceful doesn't work. And I think that is the hard and painful realization, because it would be so nice to just imagine the whole world could be at peace, but I don't know if it is possible. I certainly wish it was, but I don't know. It just feels like there will always be some sort of conflict, and maybe it's good to, in a situation like this, have a police, have someone, some sort of security. I don't know. But yeah, this is Altamont, the day the music died, the moment the hippie dream lost its innocence. And I would just love to know what you think about all of this, because it's heartbreaking. It honestly truly is. And I keep finding myself coming back to wondering whether there would have been a way that this could have gone down without the violence and the deaths. I understand that they didn't ban drugs and alcohol, but on the other hand, I wonder if maybe that would have been for the best. I honestly don't know. This is all I wanted to tell you about the Altamont Festival. This is all I found out. This is all my thoughts and feelings, and I'm just here now to listen and hear what you have to say. But yeah, that brings me to the end of this video. I hope you learned something. But yeah, if you enjoyed the video, I would love you to give it a thumbs up and maybe even share it with a friend. It supports me, it supports the channel, and it would truly mean the world. Also, if you're not watching this on the Sunday that this goes up, but maybe a day after, today's my birthday, January 19th. So if you're seeing this on my birthday, or even the day before or after, you can give me a little present by just giving this video a like. It always helps. But yeah, I want to thank you for watching. It honestly means the world. If you like what you saw, consider subscribing. That would be another fun gift. But yeah, I make videos all about the 1670s. I have more on the Stones to come. I have a very highly requested video coming next week about a 60s icon, a wonderful actress who I haven't featured in my music series because I wanted a little more time to research for her life. But yeah, then I have more Stones videos coming. There's a Beatles video in the pipeline, and then there's a completely different video coming. I'm also currently renovating, or more so restoring, our house. It's a 1964 build, and we're working on getting that all beautiful and back to its former glory. So if that is something for you, consider subscribing. I would love to have you around. I hope you have a beautiful day. Go out, enjoy the sunshine, take yourself some time to focus on you and your mental health today, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye, dolls.